Hello, I am Remo Yes Man, and today I would like to talk about 3 support Warframes that everybody should already have in their arsenal. Now, these are 3 damn good support frames, but they're not necessarily the best frames. The criteria for this is the frames are easy to get and they're frames that everybody should have access to, with one being the exception because her parts come around on a per monthly rotation via the invasion system. Now, this list is in no particular order, so without further ado, let's just jump into it with number 3, and that is going to be Volt. Volt is one of our starter frames, and Volt is extremely good. Volt is a top tier Warframe, and it's not immediately apparent to a lot of new players how good Volt is. But if you want to talk about a Warframe that will take you from the beginning of the game all the way to end game, Volt is that frame. Now, when we look at Volt's abilities, his first ability is Shock. Shock launches a voltaic projectile that stuns and damages enemies. Now, this is by far his most useless ability, and if you're going to assume ability, this is likely going to be the one you get rid of. Now, his second ability, Speed. Volt embodies an electric current that gives he and his allies a brief movement speed and reload speed buff. This is kind of one of those abilities where it's like, why not? You know, you might as well cast this. Now, if you're a new player, it might take you a while to get used to the speed, but once you get used to it, it's a pretty useful ability. Next up, his third ability, Shield. Volt deploys an electric shield that blocks incoming projectiles. Now, this ability does exactly what it says it does, but one thing that's not immediately obvious is if you put the shield down and you simply stand and shoot through it, it will amplify your damage. I don't know if it's a double damage buff or what. Either way, it's a substantial increase to your damage, so you might as well be shooting through this damn thing. Volt's final ability discharges electricity that courses through him and paralyzes enemies and damages enemies over time. Now, this ability is actually really good as long as you use it in conjunction with his augment. Now, Volt also has a passive to where the more you move, the more a meter will build up in the corner of your screen all the way to 1K. And when that meter builds all the way up, you'll deal an additional amount of damage on your next attack. Now, if you're going to be using Volt, you really do want to head over to the Syndicate just to pick up his Capacitance Augment. This augment is his bread and butter, and he really doesn't need shit else as far as augments go. Now, as far as Volt's acquisition, Volt can simply be obtained by heading to your dojo and fast traveling to the Tenno lab and purchasing Volt's parts. Volt is that easy to get. Volt is an absolute beast and you really should be using him. Next up, we have Mag. Now, Mag is another one of those Warframes that's pretty fucking nutty once you know how to use her, but it may not be apparent to a lot of new players how good she is. I want to say she's probably one of the least popular starters, although her popularity may have gone up in recent years. Now, when we look at Mag's abilities, her first ability, Pull, she manifests a magnetic vortex. The vortex pulls in polarized shards and stuns enemies to place them directly in front of her. Now, this ability is complete ass, but there used to be a farm back in the day where you would equip her augment called Greedy Pull, and you would use her in conjunction with a Hydroid, and you would do a little loot form that was boring as fuck, but it did work. Now, her second ability, Magnetize. Tap to enclose target in a magnetic field that ensnares enemies and deals damage over time. Hold to surround herself in a magnetic field that absorbs ranged attacks. Now, for the most part, you are not going to be using this ability like the description states. This ability is really good as long as you cast it normally and you just shoot whatever your most powerful weapon is into that magnetic ball. Now, this has a very strange interaction with certain weapons like the Deltron, or more famously, the Lanka. The Lanka plus Mag's magnetize ability equals absolute destruction. Next up, her third ability, Polarize. Emit an energy pulse that depletes enemy shields and armor as it restores ally shields. Debris left over from the pulse becomes polarized shards. Now, for the most part, this ability is her bread and butter as long as you use it with her counterpulse augment. If you use this with her counterpulse augment, it's going to give her so much survivability, it's crazy, and it's going to allow her to have a much easier time on the still path. For her final ability, Crush, magnetize the bones of nearby enemies, causing them to collapse in on themselves. Now, this ability used to be ass, but I think they reworked it. Either way, I still really don't use it. Now, if you're going to be using mag in late game areas, you really want to head over to the Syndicate and pick up that augment I mentioned earlier. The augment in question is Counterpulse. Now, what Counterpulse is going to do is every time you cast her Polarize ability, any enemies caught in the radius of Polarize are going to have their guns jammed for 4 seconds. I know that does not sound like a lot, but that gives her so much CC, it's crazy, and it allows her to survive in late game areas. So if you're going to be using mag, pick up that counterpulse. As for her acquisition, mag can be acquired really early by simply farming the Sergeant Corpus boss on Phobos on Illidad. So if you head over there, just head to Illidad, and the boss is an absolute fucking pushover. Even if you're a new player, you should be able to pretty much just run in there and one tap that guy. Anyway, moving on. Last but not least, we have DE Megan's favorite Warframe. We have the girl Nyx in this bitch. Now, Nyx is another Warframe that's absolutely nutty that will take you from start to finish, but it may not be apparent how good she is if you are a new player. And if you are a new player, the first time you cast her abilities, they probably felt somewhat underwhelming. But you just have to build her right, and she is absolutely nutty in the right situations with not that much investment. Now, Nyx's first ability, Mind Control. Nyx invades the psyche of a target, confusing them and making them fight for the Tenno cause. Now, on paper, that sounds really fucking cool to be able to mind control a target and just have them fight for you. But in actual gameplay, it doesn't work as well as it sounds. And you'll probably not even notice your mind control target doing any real kind of damage. So overall, I would skip that one. Her second ability, Psychic Bolts. Nyx launches a cluster of force bolts at enemies using telekinesis. Now, the thing about this ability is it was reworked and now it has an armor strip. As long as you give her just a little bit of power strength, you can completely strip armor using this ability. And this alone makes Nyx so good, it's crazy. Now, her third ability is probably the most useful ability, and that's going to be Chaos. With a powerful Psychic Blast, Nyx causes mass hysteria on the battlefield, confusing all enemies, causing them to attack random factions. This ability is pretty much her bread and butter, and it will keep a lot of players alive in a lot of high-level situations. Now, her fourth ability is kind of boring, but it's still useful. It's going to be Absorb. Nyx absorbs all incoming damage and channels the collected energy into an explosive radio discharge. Now, this ability is kind of boring, but it can be somewhat useful as long as you're using her augment that allows her to move while she is using her fourth ability. And that augment in question is going to be assimilate. That is one of the only two augments I would actually use that belong to Nyx. Now, when we look at her augments, the other augment that would be somewhat useful is going to be the pacifying bolts augment. That's the only other augment that I would consider using in Nyx's arsenal. But either way, you have to think using one of these augments is going to cost you a mod slot. And you really don't need it for her because either way, her abilities are actually really good with her CC in conjunction with her armor strip. So Nyx is a fucking beast and you really should be using her. Now, as far as her acquisition, Nyx is a little trickier to get because in order to get Nyx, you would have to run invasions, and there's a specific invasion you want to run, and that's going to be the forward invasion assassination. Now, I believe forward comes around on a per monthly basis, and once forward does appear, you can pretty much run that assassination as many times as you want until you have all Nyx's parts. Now, that's going to pretty much do it for today. Like I said, these aren't the best support frames, but they are really fucking good, and you should have all of these frames in your arsenal by now. Okay, guys, that's pretty much going to do it for today. Thank you so much if you made it this far in the video. Likes, comments, subs will all be greatly appreciated. And the best thing you can do for me at this point is just to have a beautiful day. Thank you guys, and peace.